Hi, you guys. So welcome to the Children's Literature Panel section of our Writer Speak Wednesday series. I just have two quick announcements. One is if you are interested in reading on December 7th and you are an MFA student, please get in touch with me because we are looking for that roster now of readers, and so I'd love to hear from you. The other thing is that we have started this series of daily prompts that are showing up on the Southampton Review website and Facebook page and the Writer Speak Facebook page. And we have had a really sort of rapidly enlarging audience, and we'd love to have you guys participate. So check it out. There's one there, usually by about 8 o'clock in the morning. So I'm going to try to do this really quickly. We have three wonderful guests tonight. Tricia Rayburn, who is a 2005 graduate of the MFA program. She writes books for teens and tweens, the Maggie Bean trilogy, Ruby's Slippers. And she has a forthcoming book, which I actually think is here, Merits of Mischief. Is it here? I think.
I have an advanced copy.
Oh, great. Okay. And her young adult trilogy, Siren, was published in 11 countries, which is quite impressive. Peggy Kern, senior writer for the Blueford series, their young adult novels set in an inner city LA school. Her first novel, No Way Out, was an ALA quick pick for reluctant young adult readers, and her second novel, The Test, was shortlisted for the same prize, which is pretty cool. And her third novel, Little Peach, was workshopped here at the MFA during the summer conference this past summer. Little Peach, right? And last but definitely not least are Emma Walton Hamilton, who has co-authored more than 20 books with her for children and young adults with her mother, Julie Andrews. She's had 7 New York Times bestsellers. 3 of them are #1 bestsellers. She's serves as the educational director of the Julie Andrews Publishing Program. She directs the Children's Literature Conference, the Young American Writers Program, and she will be teaching a course in children's literature this spring for the MFA. And so after that incredibly long introduction, let's welcome.
Well, hi everybody. This is a treat. And join me in welcoming our wonderful guests, Peggy and Tricia. Many of you may recognize them from around these parts. Certainly Peggy was with us last summer at the Writers' Conference, and we are really so very lucky to have them here tonight. And I'm just going to set up a little bit about what I'm imagining the format will be tonight. This will be very informal. We're just going to, what's great about this particular panel is that between the three of us, we pretty much we run the gamut, from soup to nuts of children's writing. I'm holding up the picture book end of the discussion, and both Peggy and Tricia can speak to middle grade and YA, and I can speak a little bit to middle grade as well. So we really will be able to talk across all the mediums, all the genres in children's publishing, which is great and which isn't always the case. I thought what we might do is begin by sharing a little bit of reading with you from our various books and give you a sense of the context of the differences in terms of writing for a particular age group. And then we would talk a little bit about how we came to where we are and why we do what we do, and some thoughts and general discussion about the craft, and then we'll open it up to you guys for questions. Okay? So I think the way I'm going to begin, even though I'm reluctant to do so, simply because I'm going to go in order of the age of our audience. So being a picture book author and holding up the picture book end of the discussion this evening, I'm going to begin just by introducing a little bit about what it is to write picture books for young readers. And when we talk about picture books, just for those of you who may not be familiar with the specific term, we're talking about a very particular format. We're talking about a 32-page book, always and only. I mean, there are a few very select exceptions. You might have a 40-page book. But you might have a 46-page book. But generally speaking, it's 32 pages because picture books are published in sections of 8. They're huge printing paper that gets cut up into 8-page, one sheet that gets cut into 8 smaller sheets, and so it has to be a multiple of 8, whatever the number is that you end up with in a picture book. So 32 is the number we've arrived at over the years, and it's 1,000 words or less. And it can be any shape or size. This just happens to be a square trim, but I'm sure some of you know that some picture books are very tall, some are small. But generally speaking, what we mean is we mean a roughly equal amount of text to art. 1,000 words or less, and an illustration on every page is generally what we expect to see when we're talking about a picture book. So that if you have a book that is a chapter book that has pictures in it, that's not a picture book. That's a chapter book with pictures, right? So it is a very specific genre, picture book, and it is a very particular target age group that you're writing for. And within that, you can get variations. Of course, there are picture books that are for babies and toddlers that are, just sort of sound-alikes and pictures of, they pretty much call them concept books these days, but they might be ABC books, or they might be animals in the farm books, or those kinds of things, and very, very basic stories, counting books and so forth. And then there are your preschool and elementary school type picture books, which is what generally we write for, where you're writing pretty much for an audience that is from the age of 3 at the early end and 8 at the highest end. Sometimes 3 to 5 is the sweet spot. But, you'll sometimes get a slightly older reader. Lots of times, older readers, as they're aging out of picture books and into chapter books, still love a good picture book. I know my daughter does, and my daughter's 8. So that's the genre, and this is the latest in our most recent picture book series. My mom and I have written several picture book series together, and a couple of middle grade novels. But the current series that we're collaborating on is a series called The Very Fairy Princess. And the first book was just called The Very Fairy Princess, and it introduced the character and kind of set up the world of the series. And this book, which just recently came out, is called The Very Fairy Princess Takes the Stage. And our hero is this little girl, Geraldine, Jerry, the Very Fairy Princess, who is completely convinced that she is a fairy princess, even though everyone in her life tries to convince her otherwise. And even though she generally always has scabby knees and socks around the ankles and dirty fingernails and all of that, nevertheless, she's still always in a tiara and wings, and she's very committed to doing, princess-like things, such as making somebody smile every day and kissing frogs, because you never know when one might be a prince, and and wearing her crown everywhere, because even when you first come down the stairs in the morning, you never know who you might meet on the way down the stairs. It's the family dog, that kind of thing. So it's very, her sense of herself as a very fairy princess is very, very important to her. And so I won't read the whole book, but I'm going to share with you a little bit of the setup here. And she talks a lot about letting her sparkle out. So she says, "Hi, I'm Geraldine. I'm a fairy princess. I know that I'm a fairy princess because I feel it inside, a sparkly feeling of just knowing in my heart. Also, I do everything that fairy princesses do. I wear twirly dresses with wings and a crown, of course, help friends in need, and solve problems wherever and whenever I can. But I really let my sparkle out when I sing and dance. Fairy princesses have a lot of flair." Guess what? Madame Danielle, my ballet teacher, has made up a new show for our spring performance. It's called The Crystal Princess. I am perfect for the starring role because I already have the costume and the accessories. And since I really am a fairy princess, I'll be a natural. Fairy princesses are very practical. Unfortunately, Madame Danielle has a different idea. She wants me to play the court jester because I am so ebullient. I think that's a kind of soup, but she says it means enthusiastic, so I guess that's okay. Tiffany gets to be the Crystal Princess. She's a good dancer and really pretty, but she doesn't have a clue how to be a princess. I give her some of my best tips, but she isn't very interested, and Madame Danielle reminds me there's room for only one ballet mistress in the company. Fairy princesses can sometimes be perfectionists. Mrs. Yamamoto brings in our costumes for a fitting. Tiffany's dress is perfect. All shimmery and sparkly, and it twirls around her when she spins. It has a matching crystal tiara that twinkles in the light. Everyone makes a big fuss. My costume is a huge disappointment. It's red and yellow, not my favorite colors, which are pink and purple. It's very short. It has a silly hat and pointy shoes with bells on them. Worst of all, it makes me look like a boy. Mom says I'll look adorable anyway. Dad says I'll always be his little princess. And my brother Stuart says at least the tights will cover my scabby knees. This doesn't make me feel any better. So I'm going to stop there, but that gives you a sense of the character of Geraldine and of the tone of the series, and we can delve more into what that process is like writing for that particular audience and age group in a minute. And now I'm going to turn to you, Peggy, and ask you to give us a little bit of an intro to your reading and share with us your...
So you heard in the intro I'm a writer for reluctant young adult readers, which may sound redundant, but in fact my readers tend to be particularly reluctant. I write specifically for inner city kids who have an array of challenges, but for many of them they really felt shut out of the publishing world, I think. And, we'll get into more of it later. But in any case, that's who I write for. And in this particular book, it's called No Way Out, our main character, Harold, is a freshman in high school who has taken a job with a local drug dealer. And in this particular scene, he's hanging out with his boys, waiting for Londell, who is the local dealer, to arrive. So that is the setup for this particular scene. Jupiter gazed at the vacant house, tracing the long scar on the back of his hand with his finger. Harold recalled the day back in middle school when Jupiter punched a window, gashing himself and leaving a trail of blood on the basketball court. "I remember when you did that," Harold said quietly. "Did what?" Jupiter snapped. "Cut your hand." "Oh," he replied, shoving his hand in his pocket. "Yeah." Jupiter was quiet for a moment. "They kicked me out of school after that," he admitted, his voice trailing off. "You ever gonna go back?" Harold asked cautiously. "Nah. I'm supposed to be in Bluford now, but I ain't going to that place. No one wants me there neither," he said, his eyes fixed on a crushed beer can. "Now that Londell's out of jail, he got me working, so you know how it is." Harold nodded. He could hear Grandma's voice in his head. She'd have told Jupiter to go back to school. He was about to say it too when a mischievous smile crept across Jupiter's hard face. "Yo, remember that crazy art teacher we had in 6th grade? Harold grinned. "Yeah, Miss Kowalski. She used to dye her hair pink." "Yo, that chick was crazy," said Jupiter, jumping up from the swing. "She'd always be wearing sunglasses in class, talking about how we could be anything we wanted. She was cool, though. She used to let me stay after school and play with all the paints." "Remember those paper pumpkins we made for Halloween?" Harold said. Jupiter nodded, as if he was remembering something wonderful he'd forgotten long ago. They was cool. Then Jupiter's smile faded. "What you doing here, Harold?" he asked. "I mean, this don't seem like you. You was always quiet. I remember your grandma, too. She used to come to everything at school, even the stupid stuff." "She's sick," Harold answered. "We need money. Londell said he could help me out." Keenan chuckled bitterly and touched his swollen lip. Jupiter spat into the dirt and shook his head slowly. "What's wrong with your grandma?" he asked after a few moments. Harold shrugged. "Bunch of stuff." "My mom's sick too," Jupiter confessed. "She almost died last year." Harold looked up, surprised. "What happened?" he asked. But Jupiter didn't answer. He was staring off into the distance. "It ain't fun out here," he finally said, kicking the dusty ground in disgust. "I mean, look at this place. What kind of life is this?" "Lundell comin'," Bug yelled from across the block. His voice shattered the heavy silence of the abandoned playground. Howard jumped up from his swing anxiously. "It's about time," he thought, glancing at his watch. "I gotta get home." Jupiter lingered for a moment, his eyes focused on the ground, as if he was seeing something in the dirt no one else noticed. Then he hurried off to join his brother. "You Lundell's new delivery boy?" Keenan asked once Jupiter was far enough away. "Yeah," said Harold. "Be careful, man," Keenan whispered. "Of what?" "Of everything," he replied, looking in Lundell's direction.
I'll be reading from the first book of my new middle grade series called The Merits of Mischief. This is an advanced copy that I just got last week, which was very exciting. The official one will be out next spring. And this is a bit of a departure for me because it's about a boy, and usually I write about girls because I can relate. So middle grade generally is targeting readers ages 7 to 12-ish. There's definitely some room there. I like to read middle grade, and I'm certainly past that range. And unlike picture book, you can write as much as you want. You can just keep writing and writing and writing. And it doesn't mean that they're going to publish it, but you can just keep writing and writing and writing. So it can be as long as you want. But Merits of Mischief is about a 12-year-old good boy named Seamus Hinkle. And one day he tries to break up a fight in the school cafeteria by throwing an apple. And he means to hit the school bully, but unfortunately he hits the substitute teacher instead, and she collapses to the ground. Presumably she doesn't get up ever. And he is sent away to a super exclusive, hardcore reform school, and that's actually a top secret training facility for professional troublemakers. But he doesn't know that right away. So I'll be reading from the second chapter. He's already thrown the apple, and his parents have just taken him to a Kilter Academy for Troubled Youth, and this is what happens when they go inside. We head inside, single file. The lobby reminds me of my orthodontist's lobby, except that it doesn't have plants, magazines, or a fish tank. It doesn't have any couches or chairs, either. The only furniture is a small wooden desk in the middle of the room and an empty coat rack. A closed, unmarked door is on the far wall. Bad things, braces, retainers, all kinds of torture, happen behind doors like that. Personal effects, Miss Kilter barks. I look down. The beam of sunlight coming from the front door, which is still open, disappears under a metal bin. Your stuff, Mom prompts? It needs to be screened. Screened for knives, guns, bombs, because that's what criminals carry, just like other people carry cell phones and breath mints. I place my backpack and duffel bag in the bin. I want to ask if I'll get them back, but don't. Miss Kilter lifts the bin with one hand and tosses it on her shoulder like it's filled with feathers. She crosses the room, slides a long drawer out from the far wall, and drops in the bin. A few seconds later, there's a loud clang. That'll do it. She bumps the drawer closed with her hip. Do you need directions back to the highway? That's it? Ms. Kilter turns to me, eyebrows raised. I'm sorry, I say, only slightly aware of the blood leaving my face. It's just, we've been here 5 minutes, and what about the tour, orientation, lunch, or at the very least paperwork? This isn't summer camp, Mom reminds me. If you wanted to be treated like a good kid, maybe you should have acted like one. She said this before, like when I lost TV privileges for forgetting to make my bed 3 days in a row, or when she hid my video games after one too many late-night sessions made me fall asleep at breakfast. But it sounds different now. It feels different. Kind of like a fist to my stomach, which is why I look down and focus on breathing. Don't worry, Mrs. Hinkle. By the time we're done with him, your son will be so well behaved you'll wonder if he's the same one you left here today. As if to prove her point, Miss Kilter pats her waist, where handcuffs and a black holster hang from a thick leather belt. I'm not worried, Mom says with a small smile. Not anymore. She faces me. I try to make my eyes meet hers, but can't. Staring at the floor, I see the toes of her heels near the toes of my sneakers, and my heart lifts. She's going to hug me. Yes, she's mad and sad and disappointed. Yes, she's going to leave me here, all alone, for the next 3 months. But she still loves me. She's not giving up on me. We're going to get through this and be a family again, maybe even a better one than we were before. She leans toward me, so close I can smell this morning's coffee on her breath. When she speaks, her voice is barely a whisper. "Make me proud, Seamus," she says, then grabs me in a quick, tight hug. I open my mouth to promise I'll try, but she's out the door before I can find the words. "Stay strong, sport." Dad throws his arms around me and pulls me close. His belly jiggles against my chest, and I know he's fighting tears. "And remember what I always say, if someone's not being nice..." His voice fades, and now I'm fighting tears too. Because what Dad always says, what he always said was, if someone's not being nice, kill them with kindness. But he can't say that anymore. Somewhere outside, Mom calls for him. He presses his face into my hair, kisses the top of my head, and releases me. I watch him leave, a blur of khaki and yellow plaid. He pulls the front doors closed behind him, careful not to look at me again. The doors click. Sunlight vanishes. A moment later, a car starts. It was an accident. Of course it was. I see it all perfectly now. Fists flying, lunch trays sliding, Miss Persephone falling, clutching her head with both hands. It was a terrible, tragic accident that everyone will understand once I explain, that they'll forgive once I apologize. "I'm sorry," I whisper. Beneath me, my feet begin moving. "I'm sorry," I say, louder. My feet move faster. Soon I'm running, sprinting, flinging the door open. "I'm sorry!" The car's already pulling away from the curb. My breath catches when the taillights flicker red. I start to step through the doorway and am instantly yanked back. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Ms. Kilcher says quietly near my ear. It's good advice, especially since she's holding a gun to my neck.
Keep going with both of these. So you get a sense of the range, and when we're talking about children's books, we're not just talking about whimsy or gritty reality or anything in between. It's this very broad range, and encompasses so many different subjects and tones and voices. Let's just take a moment now to talk about how we all came to it, specifically how we came to writing for kids and why we chose to write for kids. And we'll go first. I think probably the thing that made me actually want to jump in and start writing for kids the most was having one, or now having two. But I've been writing ever since I was a kid. I mean, I've been a voracious reader and writer ever since I can remember, and I had sort of done this detour off for quite some time into theater, but been teaching playwriting through my work at the theater to middle school and high school students, and at a certain, and in the process of all of that, teaching writing and working with dramaturgy and the theater and so forth, I had my first child, and spent hours upon hours upon hours reading with him, and my mother had written a couple of books for children at that time, many years ago, back in the 70s. And she'd written 2 middle grade novels, actually. And her publisher was asking if she would ever consider writing something for a younger child, a picture book. And she said, I've thought about it, but I'm not really sure I would know where to begin. And the publisher said, well, think about it, because we'd certainly love to talk to you about that. And she came to me and said, if you were looking for a book to read with Sam, if there was something that you know that he would love but that is missing, that you feel like doesn't exist in the marketplace that you wish you could have to read to him, what would it be? And Sam was basically, when he was pre-verbal, he was totally addicted to trucks. And trucks ate, slept, breathed, everything, dreamed trucks, and would only wear shirts with trucks on them, and would only watch videos with trucks in them, and would only read books about trucks. And I, at the time, could only find nonfiction picture books for him, things about how bulldozers go crunch and lots of photographs and all, but if you can name 100 trucks and those kinds of books. But nothing that had a story, nothing that was character-driven, nothing that had any substance, really, more than just, this is the kind of work trucks do. This was before, by the way, the Macmillan's brilliant series on trucks. And so I said, well, it would be so obvious to me. It would be an anthropomorphic truck book that had, trucks at the heart of it as the main characters, but also some other characters and some substance and a good theme and a good yarn. But it doesn't exist. And she said, well, why don't we try to write one together? And we've been writing together ever since. That one story became part of a series called Dumpy the Dump Truck, and we went from there into a couple of other picture books and some middle grade novels, and poetry anthology, and now this series. And I've never looked back. I honestly have just, this is my happy place, writing for kids. It is so completely rewarding and joyful and engaging on every level. And people often say, well, you know, don't you want to write for grown-ups? I mean, you know, okay, you can write for kids, but what you really want to do is write for grown-ups, right? And I'm like, you know, I really want to write for kids, actually. I really do. I find it is a particular creative challenge that I really respond to. And particularly for me, I particularly enjoy the picture book genre because it is so specific. Because it's like, it's a form of poetry in a way. You have to kind of fit into this particular model. But within that, you have tremendous freedom and tremendous creativity. And yet you also want to kind of be fresh each time. And I mean, it's a really tough thing to do. And, you know, a lot of times people think, picture book, kids book, you know, anybody can write that. How hard can that be? You know, it's hard. It's really hard, and but it's thrilling. And it's especially thrilling when a kid comes up to you and says something like, you know, I love your book, or your book turned me on to reading, or, you know, your book was the first book I ever read, or that kind of feedback is, there's nothing like it. There's just nothing like it. It's amazing. And when you get to do school visits and they send you letters, and it's just amazing. So I feel very, very blessed to continue to be doing this. How about you?
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree with what you just said, Nora. I think I'm still not exactly sure how I ended up writing books for inner city black kids, because in case you didn't notice, kind of white. But
Past life. Okay.
What's that?
It's past life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm a bit translucent.
Yeah.
But I certainly grew up with one foot in the world I just read from. I grew up in a very diverse, lower to middle income neighborhood. Grew up with, was really blessed to grow up with really being the minority in my neighborhood. I was mostly black and Latino. I then went to college. I was a student here, an MFA student. I never technically finished my thesis, so I can't say I'm an alumni, but, and then drifted a lot after that. Tried to write short stories, was really bad at it. I did a lot of mentoring with inner city kids, and by sheer luck, a guy I had gone to college with had started this series. And asked me to audition, and I did, and it was just the perfect match.
Now, how do you audition for a series? Like, first of all, tell us about the series. This is the Bluford High series.
It's called the Bluford High series. It has a wonderful story. It was created because my friend and editor Paul was doing a project in Philadelphia, and the goal of the project was to get inner city kids, black kids, reading. And there's, you know, a huge literacy crisis and just a lot of issues with those particular kids. And so they did this reading drive where they handed out free books to kids, classics, you know, Lord of the Flies and, you know, kind of the stuff we grew up with. And the kids would read the book, and then they were supposed to call in and talk about the book, and they would get, I don't know, like $25 or something. And it was a total failure. Like, the kids didn't want to read it, nobody called, it was like crickets, you know. And what Paul discovered was that these kids felt no connection to the books they were being given. The characters didn't look like they did. They didn't live in the same world. These children are living with huge amounts of trauma. Poverty, you know, they're living in the middle of a drug war. I was actually mentoring a girl in North Philly who was given Lord of the Flies to read in school, and she did read it. And I said, "What did you think?" And she looked at me and she said, "What did they think was going to happen?" Like, she was so not shocked or impressed by this. Like, duh, like, come to 25th and freaking, you know, Walnut, and I'll show you Lord of the Flies, you know. So my point is that this series was created to give these kids the books that no one ever wrote for them, to give them books they could handle from a reading standpoint. Many of them read at below grade level. And to give them, characters with their faces, characters who spoke like they did, characters who had families that they had, who faced the same challenges that they did. And 18 books later, we have 8 million copies in print. We have 80,000 fans on Facebook. There's been a huge response, and it's the best job in the whole world. It's just
And it's
the best
multiple
job in the
authors,
world.
right, Peggy? There are a couple of you.
Well,
who
we're
write-
down to one right now. We have a real challenge finding writers who can do this and who want to do this. Right now it's me and Paul. We did have a woman who wrote with us for a long time, but she's no longer doing it. We are always looking for writers. So if anybody wants to audition, we would love to.
And how do you
hear from
audition?
You.
What is an audition for Blues
You
for House?
email me. You pitch a storyline. It's good to be familiar with the series and with kind of what we do, and we do have characters that sort of go through the books, but you're also welcome to introduce new people to our world. And if we like your pitch, we'll let you write a first chapter, and if we feel that you're hitting the mark, you'll be invited to try a book. So that's kind of how it goes. We're always looking for people, but it's a challenge. You have to know their world. You have to know their world, and you can't get it wrong because they will eat you up. If you get it wrong, they will not tolerate it. So if you they smell. If you're not authentic, they will put the book down. If you try to preach, we were talking about this earlier, and I think this is true for all young adult fiction. If you try to preach to them, they will put the book down. And you have to, and we were talking about this also, I think for all young adults, but especially for these kids, you have to hook them in the first page. You have to, get them early, keep them hooked, and give them a book they can't put down. And if you do that, I mean, we've certainly found, I call these gateway books. These are the books that prove to them that the world of literature holds something for them, that there are books that will speak to them. And when that happens, they get hooked on reading, and then they move on to more challenging books. And, the ripple effects are just wonderful. So.
Great, fabulous. Tricia, how did you get started?
It was all a big accident. It wasn't supposed to happen.
You went running down the hall saying, "I'm sorry."
I say that though, but I think that the universe was really dropping pretty major hints my whole life, and I was just sort of ignoring them because you don't grow up. Most kids anyway don't grow up saying that they're going to be a writer and they're going to write books because their parents are saying, no, you're not. You're going to go to law school and you're going to go to med school and you're going to pay your bills and that's what you're going to do. So you don't really think about it necessarily as a job or something you're going to grow up and do. But when I was very young, I read all the time. I was never ever without a book in my hand. I would save my very small allowance from cleaning my room and vacuuming we lived in Riverhead. Twice a year, my mother, who would not drive anywhere, would drive to the Smith Haven Mall, and I would save my allowance for when we would go, and I would go to B. Dalton or Walden Books, I don't remember which one it was, sadly, and I would spend my allowance on the latest Babysitters Club, Sweet Valley High, and Sweet Valley Twins books, because those were the ones that I just lived for. The other, what was left of my allowance, which wasn't much, I saved, the rest of it I saved for the Scholastic Book Club in school that came about once a month, and every month I would take that flyer home and I would examine it and circle things, and I would sit there for hours just trying to figure out which one I was going to spend my $2 on, and then when the books came, it was like Christmas morning, it was always so exciting. And then I got to college, and I figured it was probably time to get serious. And by the way, I read Babysitters Club till I was about 16. They age out at 13, but I just kept going because I just loved them. They were my girls. I wanted to be in their club. And then in college, I figured it was about time to get on either track, medicine or law. So I took biology courses, and I took poli-sci classes and economics classes, and they were fine. They were interesting. But then I bought an LSAT book, and I flipped through it, and I said, no, I can't even sit for the 2 or 3 hours to take this test. There's no way I can go to law school. And what ended up happening after I started ruling out these different majors in college, I ended up gravitating always back toward literature. So I ended up majoring in American literature. I took, I think, 2 creative writing classes. These were my first creative writing classes I'd ever taken. I couldn't believe they were actual classes, and I got credit for them, and that my homework was to just go home and make things up. So those were a lot of fun. But then when I got out of school, what do you do with that? I didn't know. So I moved to Boston because I went to school in rural Vermont, and from there you're supposed to go to a metropolitan area so that you can get things going. So I went to Boston. From Boston, I went to San Francisco. I ended up. Is this going to go on YouTube? Really? Okay. This is the first time I'm admitting this in such a public way. I worked at Enterprise Rent-A-Car after graduating from college, and I was vacuuming cars, and I was renting them out, and I was trying to get people to take that darn damage waiver and taking their money from them, and this is what I was doing in San Francisco, which was a lovely place. So I was in San Francisco when September 11th happened, and my family was all still here. Everyone was fine, but every time I talked to my mom, she'd say, "When are you coming back? What are you doing out there?" And she knew I wasn't really doing anything out there. So I said I would come back if there was something to come back for and to do. So I did some research and was so happy when I found that that Southampton College had a Master of Fine Arts program in creative writing. Again, what was I going to do with it? I don't know. But it sounded good going to grad school, so I applied and I was accepted and I enrolled and I moved back. And then Laura Lyons, hi Laura, who was the director of the continuing education department at the time at Southampton College, was kind enough to hire me as an administrative assistant here. So I worked here full time. I took classes part time, and they were all great and I loved them. But I really felt like I was just sort of killing time again and stalling until I, figured out what I was really going to do. And, the days were ticking by, years. I was getting older, and I figured I was going to be in the exact same spot that I was in 3 years before, except worse because I was going to pay all this money to go to school. So I actually almost didn't finish the degree. I came really close, and then I was like, I have to get a real job and, really figure things out. Not that continuing education wasn't a real job. It was a real job, but, I needed to, move on. So one of my very last electives was one of the only ones that fit in my schedule, and I loved all my classes and I loved all my teachers, but I never really thought about what I was going to do with all the wonderful things I was learning and doing. But one of the last electives I took was with Lou Ann Walker, and that was reading and writing children's literature. And it had never, not once, ever occurred to me to try my hand at children's literature. It just never occurred to me. So the first day in Luann's class when I found out what we would be reading, Harry Potter, and what we were going to be talking about in the assignments, it was just an instant connection. I was so excited. I'd always enjoyed all of my other classes, but this was on a completely different level. And the final assignment in Luann's class was to write the first 30 pages of a young adult book, which I did, and I turned it in, and I loved it, and it was great fun. It was so much fun doing that when the class was over and the assignment was done, I decided to just keep writing it, just because I felt like it. So I wrote the whole thing. I wrote a book, and that ended up being my thesis for the MFA. Luann was my advisor. And in our very last meeting in her office, she'd read it. We were moving. It was all coming to a close. I was really going to have to figure things out the next day. I said to her, totally as an afterthought, because it really hadn't occurred to me ever until that very moment, I asked Luann, do you think I could actually do something with this, try to get it published? Because I really hadn't even thought about it. And Luann, who was always very positive and encouraging and wonderful, said, sure, but have absolutely no expectations. So I didn't have any expectations. I had hope, but really no expectations. And I did a lot of research. This was, I think, in 2004, and there wasn't a lot of, there just wasn't as much information available online, so I got the big, fat children's writers and illustrators market guide that weighs 30 pounds, and I was researching all the agents who might be interested, and then researched query letters, and I wrote a query letter, and Luann was kind enough to read my query letter and make sure it was on track. And then I picked 10 agents to send it out to, and then just sat back and waited, went back to work in continuing education and worked with the day camp. I think Sam was in the day camp once, and just continued doing my thing with no expectations. And then everything I read said that agents would get back to you maybe in 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks. If they did, they might not, because if they're not interested, they may not even get back to you at all. 2 days after I mailed out the letters, I started getting responses from agents asking for more material and saying they were interested and things. So then, all of a sudden, this writing thing was potentially like a real thing that I could do. So I was really very excited. So I ended up signing with one of those agents. I'm still with her today. She's with Writers House in New York, and that my MFA thesis turned into this, The Melting of Maggie Bean, which was my first book. Simon & Schuster bought it in a 2-book deal, and it never ever, I'm very firmly convinced, never would have happened without this program, without Luann, without the wonderful faculty here. And even though I didn't mean for it to happen, I think that everything was sort of guiding me gently, although sometimes it felt unpleasant to this place. And I'm just really, really grateful. It's the best job, as we both mentioned. It is. I can't believe I get to do it. I'm very fortunate and grateful every single day that I can, and that I get to, that my clients are children who, write me and send me wonderful notes, and I talk to them, and Melting of Maggie Bean, which is about a little chubster who eats too much candy and has to lose weight. They email me, and either they're like Maggie and can relate, or they know people like Maggie, and maybe they weren't always so nice to people like Maggie, but then they read Maggie and so they're going to be nicer from now on, and things like that. I mean, it's just an unbelievable thing. So that's how it came to be.
That is such a great story.